Very worshipful Dennis, are we okay with the polls?
Yeah, okay na. Nakikita mo na ba?
Okay.
Can you see them?
I can't see the polls yet.
Mamaya na lang. Baka i-launch mo bigla.
Yeah. Don't. Yeah, you'll launch it for me, right?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
We have, until now, may humahabol 1,023 registrants.
I hope Cable 2 is on, so they don't have to register for those who don't want to do the polls or the Q&A.
Dumadami na yung marunong mag-register. Dati, konti lang.
Wait. We have, until now, may humahabol 1,023 registrants. 212 are already in. So maybe 6:15. I think we can start.
Katulad dito ng dati, no, Kuya Dennis, pag nag-webinar na, si Kuya Teddy lang lalabas sa screen, no?
Hindi. I-highlight ko lang siya.
You mean the presentation, right? The other screen.
Presentation.
To all brethren who are already in and waiting for the webinar to start, we'll just wait for the others to come in. We have 1,023 registrants, so our registration is building up to 250 as of now. Kuya Limwell, Gonda, you're raising your hand. Can you use the chat for the moment so we know what your concern is? Later on, for the information of everybody, if you have any questions or you want to bring up something, you can use the Q&A. May Q&A sa baba ng inyong screen. So use the Q&A. So Kuya Teddy will be able to see your questions and then he will be able to answer them one by one. In the course of the webinar, if there are things that needs to be attended on my side, I will be sending the answers already. For the chat, you can send greetings to everybody and then you can also put in your comments in the chat, but some of the chat will not be seen by the panelists. So it's good if you use the Q&A side. For the participants also, if you want to raise your hand, I can allow you to talk as long as our main speaker, Very Worshipful Teddy Kala, will allow you to. Otherwise, we will make use of the Q&A. We might run out of time if we will be allowing everybody, all brethren, to be speaking and mentioning their comments. So it's best, please make use of the Q&A. Or if you have any greetings, use the chat. Okay, the chat will work. Okay. Handout, most likely Very Worshipful Teddy will be sending it out through the cable tow. So hopefully the cable tow can print it out.
Yeah.
Kuya Vodik, if it is
Yeah,
assume,
we'll issue the handout.
yeah. Kuya Vodik Santos, is it safe to assume that my audio is not interrupting anything? Very well. Yes. Your audio will not be interrupting anything, Kuya Vodik. Okay? Sagutin ko na nga kayo. And then, hello. Yes, sir.
Your audio will not be interrupting anything because this is in a webinar format.
Kuya Paulo, hope there will be a PDF copy of the MLB with updated edicts approved in previous ANCOMs. Yes, there is one. Actually, the PDF. We already have the printed book, Kuya Paulo. So you can buy it at the Masonic supplies in the Grand Lodge. And hopefully, if things will turn out well, we'll be able to upload it also in our what you call this, in our website. Kuya Jose Umlas at saka Kuya Adelino Kabiling Junior, sasagutin na lang kayo mamaya ni Kuya Teddy ha. Mahaba yung mga tanong nyo eh. Kasama sa lecture nito.
This lecture is for an orientation of the law book. We're not going to go into specific questions now. You can send this to me after. If you have specific questions about lodge governance or Masonic work, you can send it to me after the orientation. This is a 45-minute orientation on
Kuya
our
Adelino
Masonic laws and
Kabiling
regulations. We obviously
Junior,
will not
sasagutin na
cover
lang kayo mamaya ni Kuya Teddy ha. Mahaba yung mga tanong nyo eh. Kasama sa lecture nito. Colocado, it's not.
This lecture
okay?
is for an orientation of the law book. We're not going to go into
IMS online
specific
diploma.
questions.
Okay, so don't worry about that. Who are among the qualified complainants on filing unmasonic conduct with the brother Mason? Oh my goodness. Kuya Teddy will be covering that later.
We will not cover specific questions because we only have 45 minutes. You can send this. You can ask your district grand lecturer. You can ask me after.
Okay.
So not a problem.
Kuya Jose,
But
okay.
not for this session. Okay.
Okay. Please refer to.
And hopefully, with this session, you can answer the questions yourselves, assuming you have a copy of the MLB.
In 8 minutes, we're about to start.
You can send this. You can ask your district grand lecturer. You can ask me after. Okay, not a problem. But not for this session.
Kuya Teddy, may question dito about investigating committee. You're covering that, right? Not much.
Not for this session.
Not for this session.
Not for this session.
Okay, so Kuya Dindo Kabiling, I will send you a link.
For this one, they can, if they want to go into that after, they can look it up in the MLB, or for next month we will be talking about the investigating committee of petitioners.
Yan,
That's in the webinar series.
It's a part of the webinar series. That's what I'm supposed to say. Please send
you know, what is the main point of these webinars? We're not here to do the IMES course, okay? So we're not going to go really deep. These webinars are really here to stimulate discussion, get you more interested in the different facets of our craft, and hopefully you'll be able to do more of this after you go through the webinar. So unlike the IMES course, where it's very intense, very deep. This one is more guided tours. And this is really an informal fellowship because you want to keep it to only 45 minutes. If we go beyond that, baka mahilo na kayo, brethren.
Okay, so
We start in 6 minutes.
yes,
Very worshipful, Dennis.
yes. In 6 minutes, we'll be starting our webinar. Wait.
Just give our host, very worshipful Dennis, some leeway because it's not usual that he has to attend to over 1,000 registrants.
So we have 1,041. Actually, hanggang ngayon may mga nagre-register. We have 1,041 registrants right now who signed up for this webinar. And then we have 323 already who are in. Kuya Teofilo Royulada, you have a question here. It's live on FB, so I will be asking Cable to maybe it will once it's live on FB, you can watch it again. Let me just check with them.
Apologies lang for our participants on Facebook. The ones who can participate in the poll questions and the Q&A are those who are registered. If you want to try out answering the poll questions later, you can try registering now. So you can be a part of the Zoom webinar itself. In short, if you answer on Facebook, on the Cable Taos page on Facebook, we won't be able to see your answers. Thank you also to all the brethren sending greetings. Happy to have all of you here. Not just from the Philippine Masonic jurisdiction, but around the world. I understand for brethren in the US and Canada, I think it's early morning there.
Okay, Kuya Teddy, in 2 minutes, huh? We can start in 2 minutes. Again, brethren, for information of everybody, in Zoom is quite unique because it only recognizes the device that you use in registering. So if you will hear some brethren who said they were not able to log in when with the reply that was sent to them, that is because they're using a different device. So if you will be using a different device from the one that you used to register, it will not recognize it. So you have to use again that device and register so you can use it. Okay, that's one safety feature of this platform. So that's part of the security measures that they have instituted in protecting those who are joining the webinars in Zoom. So for those who will hear later on some issues that they were not able to check in, because I got already a few number of calls about that. Okay, just so for everybody's information. Yes, can we order? Yes, you can order the Masonic Law Book. We're working on the website. Just wait for it. Maybe we'll be done within the week. By next week, you can already order not only the Masonic Law Book or anything in the Masonic supplies, and we can send it to you. Okay. That's for Kuya Dan August Oro. Okay. So you don't need to go to the Grand Lodge. And then Kuya Darwin Borja, you didn't say anything. Just a few questions. Yeah, I didn't say anything. Okay. Kuya Daniel, um, no, it's not. If your devices are synchronized, they won't. Okay, it recognizes if it's a phone, a laptop, or an iPad. So it's kind of unique. To Kuya, yeah, Kuya Vodik, we're gonna start now. When Kuya Emmanuel, when are you going to bring back the Masonic app where we can check the authenticity of members? Kuya Emmanuel, what we're doing now is we're cleaning the list. Once we're done with the cleaning of the list, it's the instruction of the Grand Master to clean the list per lodges. We will be able to put that up again, and then we can check on our brethren who are there. Okay. Kuya Darwin, is there a certificate for this webinar? None, because it's not a it's not a formal IMS course. No, this is part of our ongoing Masonic education that we're trying to work on because of this pandemic that we're into. Okay.
It's an online fellowship, brethren. It's really to stimulate discussion. If you want, if you manage to finish all 10, then maybe you can request Kuya Dennis and we'll look into it.
Yes.
See if we can give you a certificate of participation. But it's not supposed to be an IMES course or any other course. It's really just to stimulate discussion. And hopefully you have takeaways that you can use after you attend each webinar.
Okay. Good evening, brethren, most worshipful sir and very worshipful sirs, and to all who have joined into this webinar. This is our second of a series of webinars that most worshipful Grandmaster Agapito S. Suan Jr. have instructed our team, just so we will be able to, like this one, have a fellowship among brethren with a healthy discourse of ideas and thoughts about what is happening in our Grand Lodge now. Very timely is the issuance, no, actually, not the issuance. Very timely is the publication of the updated Masonic Law Book, Series 2019. And with this, we decided to put in the July session on Masonic Jurisprudence our 2019 Masonic Law Book, which is basically an orientation of what is in that Masonic Law Book. And fortunate, again, we have this evening a very competent and who we call the rock star in terms of Masonic education, very worshipful Senior Grand Lecturer Teddy Calao, to do the lecture on this matter. Also, we have part of the panelists is our incumbent Assistant Grand Secretary, Very Worshipful Oliver Yabut, who will be helping in later on in the course of the question and answer part. Our most worshipful Grand Master, who is very diligent and who is always in the Grand Lodge every day, in and out, and who has always been monitoring things despite the pandemic. He just want to make sure every brethren is safe, doing well, and everything's okay. Decided to stay at the Grand Lodge now in his office just so the brethren will see how still dedicated and passionate he is in working on his commitment, to continue on under this situation where we have extended the term and making sure that we will still be able to operationalize charity among the brethren under this pandemic situation. So to start off, with already 370 brethren who are already in the webinar, and with 1,024 registrants. I think they're still coming in as we go along the way. May we now hear the message of our most worshipful Grand Master. Most worshipful Sir.
Brethren, good evening. I welcome you all and appreciate your participation for the topic orientation of the 2019 edition of the Constitution and Masonic Law Book. This is the first of the monthly JLP Masonic Education webinar series, which we have designed particularly during the lockdown period using the Zoom platform. But I believe that even if we go back to normalcy, the Grand Lodge should continue with this program. The online method of instructions and communications is proving to be well suited for Masonic education. We reach all brethren within and outside the Philippines, and so there is greater participation. You can access it from the comforts of your own homes or offices. And so, this is the best social distancing compliance there is. Plus, we do it at a negligible or affordable cost. This is apart from the regular IMIS courses, which we shall shortly launch also online like this. There are requests that we issue creditable certificates of participation for the JLP webinar series, and this is under consideration. Obviously, there are some technical fine-tuning involved, so please bear with us. Today, the webinar will walk you through the important features of the new edition of the Masonic Law Book. But let me clarify that this is the result of the works of previous administrations. During his term, Most Worshipful Voltaire Gazmin proposed to update the Constitution through a special communication, which was granted by the 101st ANCOM. Most Worshipful Bambol Tolentino then formed a joint committee to update the Constitution and subsequently called and presided over the special communication, which approved the proposed integration updates. And under my term, I formed a committee to oversee the publication of the works. The 2019 edition of the Masonic Law Book is the result of all these labors. It is intended as a complete single reference book, meaning you don't have to search outside of it because it already contains all constitutional provisions as amended by approved edicts, all other regulatory edicts in force as of the present, and all important and relevant manuals of the craft on rituals and ceremonies as practiced in this jurisdiction. Of course, after its publication, any future actions of succeeding ANCOMs may require further updates to the Constitution. Naturally, my own edicts were not included in this edition as they have not yet been acted upon by the ANCOM. But if this will be approved, they will impact certain edicts, most notably the several edicts in the handling of petitions for decrees, which will rationalize under Edict number 328. In the meantime, I urge everyone to use the lockdown period to read or review our updated Constitution. Let us all familiarize ourselves with the new Masonic Law Book. Thank you, brethren, and be Masonically informed through the lectures of our ever proficient and hardworking Senior Grand Lecturer, Very Worshipful Teddy Calao. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Most Worshipful Sir. Your message indeed will now kick off this discussion. But before Kuya Teddy Sir will deliver his lecture, I would like to acknowledge Sir as part of our attendees for this evening, Most Worshipful Abelino Rason Sir. He's joining the group. Okay, Kuya Teddy.
Very worshipful Dennis, can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes. Wait. Go.
So we can begin. Okay. Thank you, Most Worshipful Sir, and good evening, brethren. Welcome to the first of a series of 10 webinars, which are essentially 45-minute online fellowships where we get to know a little more about Freemasonry, discuss it, and see if it doesn't jive with what we know, see where, whether we can develop further in the craft. Today we'll be talking about the Masonic Law Book, and by that we mean the bundle of laws, regulations, and Masonic traditions that are published together. A lot of brethren ask me, what do you call this book? Because on top it says Constitution, but below it's called the Masonic Law Book. What is it really called? Well, it's called the Constitution because the first of 5 parts, it starts with the most important regulations, which is a Constitution. But together, this bundle is what we call the Masonic Law Book. And so today we're going to look at a bird's eye view of all those 5 parts, and we will find out a reliable approach. So you don't have to ask a grand lecturer next time. You can, try it out yourself to see if you can find an applicable rule for the situation you find yourself in. Also, we're going to look at how the Masonic Law Book is amended and distinguish it from how it's updated. So that if you find, for example, that the rule doesn't appear to be right, it may be because there is a edict that has recently been issued, which is not part of the law book. We show you how the Masonic Law Book, whether it's a constitution or ordinances, is amended going forward. Those are our 3 objectives. What is not an objective in this session? We don't expect you to become an expert in Masonic jurisprudence after this session. If you go through the regular course in our IMES, please take note, there is a separate course on Masonic governance and jurisprudence, which will go into the different laws and regulations in detail. But what we want to do is, at least after you finish this webinar, be familiar with the law book, and more importantly, be able to, on your own, at least come up with a sensible, uniform approach to find the rule that applies in the situation you find yourself in. Okay? So with that, that's essentially what we're going to cover today. Before we go into the guided tour and how the MLB is amended and updated, and that process of applying the Masonic Law Book to your context, we have to ask ourselves, if there's one thing that you must look at, what in the Masonic Law Book, what should that be? Okay? And that, in short, we should ask, where should we start? Right? For that, we need to do a poll question first. And the first poll is, for purposes of determining residence in the Philippine Masonic jurisdiction, where is a petitioner or brother deemed to reside? A, actual place of residence. B, place of business or workplace. Baka nga A, kasi residence, right? Or B, place of business or workplace. Or C, place of birth. Or D, all of the above. Okay? I've been asked a question while you're all voting. I've been asked a question. What is the is there any other answer? Because one time when I gave this, one of the brethren asked me, very worshipful sir, I don't think the answer is A, B, C, or D. I think the answer is E. Bakit E? Well, kasi none of the above. None of the above. How did that happen? Because we are taught since we are young that residence is where home is. Teka lang. Look at it, mukhang plausible, di ba? But clearly, that's not what we mean in Philippine Masonic jurisprudence. It's clearly one of those answers. And so for that, I hope the brethren have finished with their answers so we can go forward. Very worshipful Dennis, have all the brethren answered?
60% have ongoing pa, Kuya Teddy. They're still voting.
Okay, so let's give us time. While we're answering, you might wonder, what is the poster of this movie doing in this slide deck? Brethren, as you know, in Masonic jurisprudence, sometimes it can be pretty dry, and we might have viewers who are watching who are non-Masons, who are non-brethren, and they usually may want to find something here that will support their theories about Masonry being a gigantic conspiracy out to take over the world. Unfortunately, I cannot find anything in our material to help there. So, eto na lang. I have given a poster. They want to go with those theories. They can use that poster. So, very worshipful Dennis, can we close the poll?
Okay, let's end the poll now. End poll.
And here are the results.
Share results. Okay.
So, actual place of residence. Mukha nga yan nga because residence, place of residence appears to be the same, right? Or what? Clearly, it should not. It may not be business or workplace, or even place of birth, di ba? The correct answer is, as many of you, as a majority of you have highlighted, however, is all of the above. Even your place of business. Why? Because, and I will close the poll results now, in our Masonic law book, the one place you should start is go into part 2, Article 21B, the very end of ordinances, and find the 26 specific terms that are commonly used in the Masonic law book. It is important that you remember this because, for example, residence, if you look at the poll, it's any of those three. What makes that relevant? As the majority of you know, if you are a lodge and you're going to end up with a potential member, he or she must be a resident. That is provided in the definition of jurisdiction of a lodge. He must be a resident of your place. And residence here can be, it need not be that maybe you're born in Leyte and you live in Cavite, but if you want to apply for Jacobo Zobel in Makati and you work in Makati, you would fall under place of business or workplace. So, what I want to highlight, brethren, is if you want to start anywhere in the Masonic law book, it should be Part 2, Article 21-B, because those definitions you must know before you go through all of what we term as the Masonic law book. For example, charter member. Charter member only applies to when you are starting out with the chartering of a lodge, after which you must transition by either demitting or becoming a regular member. You might be surprised in good standing. You might be surprised to know that good standing is not just paying your dues. If you are disciplined and expelled, you are no longer in good standing. There is a technical definition for that. Our notion of the Grand Master as supreme authority, subject to limitations in this Masonic jurisdiction, and Master as supreme authority of his lodge, subject to limitations, you will find it in these definitions. For example, you might also wonder, what is jurisdiction? And how do you distinguish that with the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge and jurisdiction of a lodge? Many brethren don't know that when it comes to jurisdiction of a lodge, the jurisdiction does not just apply to brethren who are members of the lodge, but brethren who follow who reside within where the vicinity of the lodge is, within the technical term of residence in our Masonic law book. You find that in our definitions. Mother lodge, can you resign, demit from your mother lodge and change your mother lodge? No. You can demit from your mother lodge, but your mother lodge will always be your mother lodge, where you were initiated, passed, and raged. That is distinguished from your parent or first lodge. Okay? If you demit from your mother lodge to go to another lodge, that becomes your first lodge for purposes of plural membership. In that first lodge, you are a regular member. Although, per our regulations, the GLP sees you as a plural member if you have that lodge and are a member of other lodges. The distinction is, if you have three, the maximum now, where you are a regular member, to the GLP, you are a plural member of those two other lodges where you are your first, in addition to your mother or first lodge. But in all of those three lodges, if you look at our definitions, you are deemed a regular member with all the rights and benefits, even if you enter membership as an affiliate. The definition for 6 months service to be considered and be deemed the past master, this is in the rules here. So, and the meaning of stated meeting. Stated meeting does not mean a meeting where you do Masonic work. Stated meeting is that regular meeting once a month where you do business. Okay? So, if you're wondering under our current regulations why Masonic work is done in special meetings, that is because the definition of stated meeting is that one meeting in a month where you do business as against Masonic work. Although you can do, normally, if it weren't for the current regulations, you would be able to do Masonic work in a stated meeting also. So it's important that you know these definitions, because usually, if you don't know these technical definitions, you might get lost when you apply the rules. And what are those rules? The 5 types of regulations that we see in our Masonic law book. There are 5 different classifications. That's why the entire book itself is called the Masonic law book. And we say the Constitution, it's on the title because that is the most important part of the Masonic law book. Part 1, the Constitution, is how the Grand Lodge is governed. Whereas part 2, when we say ordinances, we mean the rules and regulations set by the Grand Lodge for those subordinate to it. And there are 2 entities who are subordinate to it: lodges and the brethren composing them. Okay? And by brethren, we mean all brethren. That's why you see, when it comes to, for example, whether a Masonic, whether a Grand Master should be charged or not, you will see that the definition and process for charging a Grand Master is in the ordinance. Because as far as the Grand Lodge is concerned, when it comes to a charge, he is like all of us if it comes to being held accountable. That's why the process for putting charges with him, and it's never been used, but it's there in our ordinances because he is a brother like all of us. You should distinguish ordinances from the Uniform Code of Bylaws of Subordinate Lodges, because that Uniform Code is the set of traditional governance norms wherein lodges govern themselves. Before there were grand lodges, there were lodges. Okay, and those norms have been collected together and placed as part 3 because that is our traditional way of how we work and communicate together as brethren. That's why you call a meeting a communication. How we come together as brethren. Our traditional governance norms are reflected in that Uniform Code of Bylaws. So unlike ordinances, which are rules and regulations issued and enforced by our Grand Lodge from above to lodges and brethren, the bylaws of subordinate lodges is based on traditional norms of how we should govern ourselves. Okay? That's why it's there as part 3. In addition, over the years, if you look at the definition of rules and regulations in our Masonic law book, you will see that we also have other rules and norms by how we do Masonic work and address other aspects of life within the fraternity. Usually, there have been difficulties in assembling this, and the traditional way of doing it, of assembling these regulations, were to put edicts sequentially and to have them in separate pamphlets. So what we've done in this new law book is to put them together and arrange them topically so that it is easier for you to find the rule or norm in your specific situation. Finally, we have part 5, Masonic sovereignty, traditions, and forms. If Rule 4 was the rules and norms within our craft, Rule 5 relates to 3 things. The first is how our rules and norms with regard to other Grand Lodges and external stakeholders, how we are depicted publicly, number 1. Second, our unwritten laws. Our unwritten laws as described today in our landmarks and other traditional laws. That's why we call them Masonic traditions. And third, templates for recording matters of Masonic record. So that, in a nutshell, is what we call the Masonic law book. If you know which part, why each part is written that way, it's easier for you to find the rule that you are looking out for. With that, let's go to Rule 2, Poll 2, to see how this applies in detail. For purposes of clarifying what aprons, and you see here, I think this is Cavite Lodge number 2, if I'm not mistaken. The brethren of this lodge, you see they all have aprons, right? In addition to their collars and jewels. Okay? Aprons, collars, jewels, okay? Particularly aprons, okay? They are, who says what you should wear? And what kind of aprons should a specific officer or member wear, or a brother wear? Okay, so here we have 4 choices. Choice 1, and can we have the poll? Very worshipful Dennis. A, is it the Constitution? Do you find the regulation saying this is what apron you should have in our Constitution? Or the ordinances? Or part 4, within our craft, is it a regulation that relates to our work and life? Or part 5, baka it's unwritten law? Let me tell you, as your deciding brethren, 3 wrong answers. Okay? That's why they're not there. They're clearly wrong. Okay? The first wrong answer would be if you say that this is in the bylaws of a lodge. Why? Because actually before Grand Lodges, particularly the more ancient ones in the United Kingdoms, whether that's England or Scotland, they have a propensity to design their own aprons. With the growth of Freemasonry that Grand Lodges decided to make uniforms, to make aprons uniform. So clearly, the answer should not be part 3, uniform code of bylaws, uniform bylaws of a lodge. It cannot be part 3. Can you say that actually there's no requirement for a uniform apron? Brethren, if you answer that way, I will have to have a talk with your master, because as you can see, if you visit all parts of our Masonic jurisdiction, aprons are for blue lodges. That's why they're called, one reason why they're called blue. Aprons for blue lodges and even grand officers. Aprons in our jurisdiction are uniform. Okay? And that is because they are provided in our Masonic law book. There could be a third answer, which is also wrong. And you might say, well, because Most Worshipful June issued a circular saying that we should buy our aprons from the Grand Lodges store, that is the governing authority. No, if you believe that, I will have to look up your district grand lecturer and sit down with him and check if he wants to have a future in Freemasonry, because that is clearly wrong. Okay, it definitely is. If you go around, if you visit different lodges, you will see that aprons are uniform, and they're one of those 4 answers. Okay, so very worshipful Dennis, have we finished? Has everyone finished with their poll?
They're still voting.
Okay.
Give them 1 more minute, and then I think we can end it now. Okay, we're
Okay.
getting like 60%
Okay
already.
na. Or maybe we'll have 1 or 2 minutes. So,
Yeah.
brethren, I can tell you now, it's one of those 4. If you did not notice, or if you're a new brother, if you visit other lodges, you will see that aprons are uniform. And even Grand Lodge officers, they're not blue, they're purple. The aprons are uniform. It is because of the Masonic law book. It's not, you cannot find this in our bylaws, because the bylaws reflect the traditional governance norms of lodges, that when, even before there was a Grand Lodge, there were lodges, okay? How they govern themselves over time, these have been collected. It's not there because lodges, they designed their own aprons until they were subordinate to a Grand Lodge. And it's definitely not a circular telling you that you should purchase from the GLP Masonic store, because that tells you where to purchase. Okay? So, it's one of these 4, and in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's see the results. Let's see the results. Okay.
Close.
As you know, if you look at the Constitution, 19% of you said it's there. It's not. Brethren, it's not in the Constitution because the Constitution relates to how the Grand Lodge governs itself. So it's not the Constitution. Is it part 5? Well, it cannot be Masonic sovereignty because it doesn't talk, we're not talking about other Grand Lodges or the public. And we do not derive the regulation for aprons from our Masonic traditions, because aprons are designed, uniform aprons are designed by the Grand Lodge. They are required by the Grand Lodge. And they are not written forms to record Masonic matters of record. So would you find them in an edict, in a regulation that talks about our work and life in the craft? Which a majority of you answer. Very easy to be misled, brethren, but it's not part 4. Why? Who wears aprons? The brethren who wear aprons. And the brethren must wear aprons when they do Masonic work, when they meet Masonically. Therefore, who enforces that regulation, who requires that uniform apron regulation? The Grand Lodge on brethren. If you follow that logic, brethren, the only remaining answer is part 2, ordinances. And that is where you find our regulation on aprons in Article 19. Okay, right before our new article on Masonic education, which was just added recently, individual Masonic education. So what I'm highlighting here, brethren, is you have to ask, what is the rule about? The rule on about aprons is about the Grand Lodge enforcing a uniform apron requirement on all brethren within the Masonic jurisdiction. And the ordinances is really about two sets of rules. Rules the Grand Lodge is enforcing on subordinate lodges, or rules that the Grand Lodge is enforcing on brethren. That is why you'll find the rule on aprons, whether they are brethren in lodges or Grand Lodge officers, in our ordinances. Okay, so surprising. I knew this was going to be surprising. That is the rationale why we put that rule there. Thank you. And so now we can go forward with, if you know, okay. If you know, therefore, how these 5 work together, okay, then it's very easy to see and distinguish the rules within each of them. And let me go through 12, just 10 to 12 minutes on each of these 5 parts. Okay? The first part, Constitution. That's the first of 5 parts, and that's why, and it's the most important set of rules. That's why on top of our Masonic law book, you have Constitution. What is the Constitution about? One thing, how our Grand Lodge, not brethren, not subordinate lodges, but how our Grand Lodge governs itself. Okay? So for that, it has 5 basic sets of rules. The first rule is, what is the name and who composes the Grand Lodge? And within the Masonic universe of regular Freemasonry, what is its authority and jurisdiction? Okay, who has authority to act on behalf of the Grand Lodge? That is Articles 1 to 3. To determine who has authority and in what authority that act is exercises, that is why we have meetings and elections, or communications, that's our Masonic term for meetings, and our rather lengthy rules on and safeguards on who should be elected as a Grand Lodge officer in the elected positions. That is why after legal scope, we have meetings and elections. And assuming you have installed those elected officers, then you can go to the daily life of a Grand Lodge, which operates through its committees and which operates in order to be a going concern, which does business. That's why we have an article on revenues. That is the third set of rules. Okay? These committees, they are primarily supervised by Grand Lodge officers, elected and appointed. That is why the rest of that constitution is, what are the roles of elected and appointed Grand Lodge officers? And for brethren, okay, not just the Grand Master, for brethren in particular and lodges, if they feel that they, not the Grand Master, okay, but they want to amend the Constitution, we have a 5th set of rules on rule changes. Okay? So, in a nutshell, part 1, Constitution, is nothing else but how our Grand Lodge is governed. That should be distinguished from our ordinances. Our ordinances are all about how the Grand Lodge governs 2 entities, subordinate lodges or brethren. Subordinate lodges or brethren, not the Grand Lodge. These are effectively our laws that allow us to be legally subordinate lodges and brethren of the Grand Lodge of the Philippines. And these are very important. That's why when you have, for example, a letterhead you always have the Grand Lodge name on top. Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the Philippines before immediately above your lodge name because you're a subordinate lodge. Okay? So what are these rules for subordinate lodges and brethren? First, we have to look at how a lodge is formed, what are its powers, duties, and prohibitions. That's the first 5 articles of this lodge. And then, like the Grand Lodge, how it operates. Essentially, how it does Masonic work. Unlike a Grand Lodge, where you have different committees because we have to look at charity, we have to look at Masonic education, we have to look at fraternal assistance, we have to look at supervising subordinate bodies like appendant bodies and our youth groups. In subordinate lodges, you have one core function. And that core function is to do Masonic work, which is to initiate, pass, and raise brethren so that they can become Freemasons and be adept in our philosophy. That is why Articles 5, 6, and 7 relate to what subordinate lodges do and what keeps them as a going concern. Okay? Alanganin naman, libre to. Di ba? So, in order to keep them as a going concern, you must have dues, and these are, not just for the lodge, but also annual dues for the Grand Lodge. So, you have legal scope and the Masonic work that all lodges are expected to do. Because a lodge is, formed, it can also die. If, for example, brethren lose interest, or in a certain instant, the locality doesn't have enough brethren anymore, sometimes a lodge has to, there's not enough brethren to support a lodge, in which case, the lodge eventually is dissolved for lack of brethren, or the brethren voluntarily surrender their charter. As long as you have one member who is alive, however, that lodge can be reactivated. How do you do that? The death and rebirth of a lodge. That is Article 8 and 9 of our ordinances. So these 3 sets relate to the first group of rules on subordinate lodges. The next group of 3, the other half of our ordinances, relate to brethren specifically. First, part 4 is who leads the lodge. As you know, we have a very unique leadership charge here. We're not like other civic groups or even like the government, where you have so many safeguards. The essence of being a Masonic leader is trust. That's why, if you look at our definitions, you see that quote that whether you're Grand Master or Master, you are given supreme authority subject to specific limitations. Because that means that you, as Master of a Lodge or Grand Master, for a specific term, in between communications, in between meetings, are given full authority in trust by your brethren. And those are detailed, in addition to you, but also the officers supporting you, are in Articles 10 to 16. These are the lodge officers, ideally, that lodges should have. Some are more important than others, and we'll find that out by simply reading those provisions, right? And then after that, we have rules specifically on individual Masonic brethren. What you do when you communicate Masonically, when you do Masonic work. What are your rights and obligations? How do we hold each other accountable to each other? And what is our Masonic clothing and regalia? Recently, under the Most Worshipful Bumble Tolentino, we also added the requirements for individual Masonic education through the IMES. That is the new Article 20. So, this fifth set of rules relates to we, the brethren, us individually. Okay? And take note, this is not the Constitution. These are the ordinances regulating subordinate lodges on one hand, 1 to 3, parts 1 to 3, and on the other hand, parts 4 to 5, individual brethren. These ordinances, like the Constitution, can be changed, not just by the Grand Master through edict, but also through brethren, if enough brethren support them. What is that amendment process? That is in Article 21, the very last portion of the ordinances, immediately after Article 20 on individual Masonic education. That's Article 21A. Article 21B, there's our definitions. Before anything else, you read the definitions first. Okay? It's important that you need to understand ordinances, because if you don't, you will be very confused with Part 3. Okay? Part 2 are the rules and regulations set by the Grand Lodge on lodges and brethren. But if you know, as you know, Masonic history, before there were Grand Lodges, there were lodges. And lodges over the years have their own governance norms. And for these norms, of course, they must ultimately comply with whatever rules set by the Grand Lodge. That is why, to make sure that these are uniform, we have Article 3, which does not relate to rules enforced by the lodge, by the Grand Lodge on the lodge, but to traditional norms of governance set by brethren, usually to govern the lodge themselves. What are these norms? Okay? How a lodge is organized. Who are traditionally its officers? When are its meetings? To make sure that these are uniform, they are now placed as Part 3 of our Masonic law book. And then, subordinate lodge administration. In a lot of cases, these are also duplicated in ordinances, but sometimes the norms remain, even though the Grand Lodge presents in Part 2 an ideal rule that may not be feasible in some instances. In which case, and we'll see later how that will happen, in which case, you go with the norm. Okay? Now, can these norms be changed? Yes, to the extent allowable by the uniform code of bylaws. Like, for example, lodge fees. Okay, not annual dues due to the Grand Lodge, but its own lodge fees. You can do rule changes. Okay, that is Article 13. And if we know that that's the case, we now know, therefore, that Part 3 is not a simple duplication of Part 2. Part 3 is our collection of traditional governance norms from time immemorial, where lodge governed themselves. Over time, because you have many different lodges, it has become necessary for the Grand Lodge to make this uniform. That is why they're there. That is why we have uniform bylaws. In the same way that in a corporation, you have bylaws as your internal rules of the corporation, this is that internal rules of a lodge, as brought to us from time immemorial, from Masonic tradition. Okay? Finals, and then of course, we have something called, another set called regulations appertaining to work and life in the craft. In our previous editions of Masonic Law Book, this was not there, in the sense that what we had as Part 4 was a sequential placement of edicts or amendments as they happen over time. This has been a source of frustration for brethren over the years, because in order to find a rule, they have to first look at the Constitution and ordinances, and then they have to check each and every edict, assuming the Masonic Law Book is complete. What we've done this time is to take away the sequential arrangement and instead topically arrange not just the edicts, but if you follow the definition, if you follow the definition of rules and regulation, part 2, article 21B, also other rules and regulations like Masonic protocol, okay, Masonic protocol and ceremonies, and that is included in part 4 now. So how did we do it? We divided everything into seven topics. The first, obviously, is most important. How do we do Masonic work? Okay? How do you have an official cipher, our official monitor? You have to have an edict to adopt the official monitor, right? How do you do meetings, right? How do you make sure that the gavel is respected? How do you wear it properly when you're outside of the when you go around the lodge? That is a new edict by Most Worshipful Bambol. How do you close a lodge? Okay, there are two ways of doing it. There's an ample version introduced by Most Worshipful Puno. It's all there in Masonic work. And then, of course, after that, we have our protocol and commemorations. In other words, our ceremonies. First, our ceremonies at the lodge, district, and grand lodge level, and then the days we commemorate as Masonically important. The birthday of Rizal, June 19. The death of Rizal, December 30. Right? It's all there in section B. So now you know. If you're asking, okay, where can I find the ceremony to install a Grand Lodge inspector? Oh, there, district related ceremonies under B, right? And then, of course, honors and awards. How do we receive Masonic dignitaries and important guests? And what awards can we award? The Hiram Award. How do you differentiate the Hiram Award awarded by the Lodge from the Jose Abad Santos Medal? There, it's in Masonic honors and awards. Then we have Masonic Research, of course, the Philippine Lodge of Research, which is supposed to be operating. And then we have a very intricate system of fraternal conciliation, which we will address later in this. We have another webinar for that. All of our rules on Masonic conciliation, including the requirement that if you're fighting a fellow brother, before you can institute a suit or go into litigation, you have to go through Masonic conciliation. It's all there in our system of fraternal conciliation, the fifth topic. Okay. Before we go to other regulations relating to the Grand Lodge administration, like, for example, a uniform plan for lodges when you're building a lodge. How can you be an accredited supplier, right? And then other rules, other 12 miscellaneous rules addressing specific aspects of Freemasonry, okay, which do not fall with the above. So now you can see that it's all topically arranged and it's easier to find, which leads us finally to our last set. Part 4 was all the rules and regulations relating to the life and work and life of the craft within the fraternity. Part 5 relates to 4 things. First, the legal norms. I'm sorry, that's a misprint. That should be legal norms or relations with the Grand Lodge. It's not legal scope of subordinate. I don't know why it ended there. It should be legal norms of Masonic relations diplomatically. How do you get appointed to be a grand representative? Okay, to a Masonic jurisdiction. We have a very specific system of Masonic diplomacy. You are not actually Filipino brethren. They are not actually made ambassadors to other grand lodges. They are made grand lodge representatives of foreign grand lodges near the Philippines. So here you represent that grand lodge here in the same way that a brother there, if you're the representative, if it's the Grand Lodge of California, a brother there is made to represent the Grand Lodge of the Philippines there. So the rules are there. And also rules that impact us because, of a foreign jurisdiction. Like, for example, how do you deal with candidates rejected in foreign jurisdiction? It's there. We also have to look at rules that relate to our appertaining to the craft, the public depiction of the craft in the Philippines, and how we are perceived as a social institution. Like, for example, the Adopt a Schools program, also instituted by Most Worshipful Mambo. It's there. There are prohibitions on what we can be a membership of. There are specific pronouncements given our history about religious tolerance and communism. Okay? You can find how we relate, the rules on how we relate with external stakeholders, also in this section. Also, very importantly, you will find our unwritten law. Our unwritten law, okay, which is our Masonic landmarks and 10 ancient laws, which together we call our body of Masonic traditions. Now you're going to ask, teka lang, unwritten yan eh. Bakit yan naging written? Well, because over time, we have been able to describe these Masonic traditions. And it's important we describe them because they provide the rationale for the laws that are described in parts 1 to 4. Like, for example, part 2, landmark 2, which requires that symbolic masonry, we are a philosophical fraternity, is divided into 3 degrees. Or part 3, it is important that the legend of the 3rd degree, for those of you who are already in the fraternity, it is important that the legend of the 3rd degree, philosophically, shall always be a permanent part of the craft. You will find that there in our description of our traditional Masonic law. Very often, when you have to look at rationales, you have to look at this, and sometimes, like for example, the rule on the ancient rule that a Grand Master can make a Mason on site. You will only find that here because it has been handed down from time immemorial. You will find that as a Masonic landmark. For those who don't know, who was listening in, we have two. We have 2 Masons on site. That is Masons who have been initially exempted from the traditional initiation, passing, and raising, but who are required to observe that after they have become brave. We have 2. Former Deputy Governor General Eugene Gilmore and General Douglas MacArthur. We have 2 Masons of sight in this grand jurisdiction. Okay? And finally, of course, to make sure that everything is uniform when it comes to matters of record, we have specific templates as to how to do those documentation. That is part 5. So altogether now, if you know the rationale, okay? If you know the rationale for each of these 5 parts, it's much easier for you to find the rule that you want to look for. Okay? Constitution, Grand Lodge. Ordinances, the rules the Grand Lodge requires for subordinate lodges and individual brethren. Uniform Code of Bylaws, the norms, the internal rules we've had brought down to us from time immemorial about how lodges govern themselves, even before there was a Grand Lodge. That's why it's there. The Grand Lodge recognized this to made it uniform. Okay? What do we do? What do we do within the lodge? Within the craft. Okay? What are rules and norms for doing Masonic work and addressing aspects of life within the craft? That's part 4. Part 5, how do we relate to Grand Lodges and external stakeholders? That is Masonic sovereignty and public depiction, and then our unwritten law and our templates. Okay, so that's part 5. Okay, so here we go. Let's now go to poll 3 to see how let's see how you can understand this in better detail. Okay? Fall 3. In the role of chair, let's say you were tasked to update this current year's Masonic Law book, and you get this saying that there appears to be errors in the updating. What should you do? Okay? A, do nothing. Why? Kasi na-publish na eh. Sorry na lang ha. Do you do that? B, siguro yung next set ng publication, i-correct natin. Kasi ito nga, mukhang may correction. Or C, okay, baka this might be a way to amend. Are we amending the Constitution here? Because how do we know that these are indeed legitimate corrections? Or D, I think I made a big mistake. We should allow the correction and turn ourselves in to Most Worshipful June for Masonic discipline because we have illegally amended the Masonic Law book. What do you do, brethren? Pick your answer. In short, what needs to be corrected? A brother goes to you and says, Part 3, the Uniform Code of Bylaws, okay? Part 3 needs to be corrected. Your update is wrong. Why is your update is wrong? Because Article 1, Section 1, okay? You need to include orator, almoner, and lecturer. You need to include orator, almoner, in lecturer in the officers. Second, okay? What's this? Other officers shall be appointed by master except the may be appointed by the city. Yan. The principal master appoints all of that is wrong. So, do you correct that? Or do you say na-publish na eh? Na-publish na. Can we have when you have your answers, brethren? Very worshipful Dennis, how are we?
About 40% are they're still voting.
Okay.
I think you're giving them a very hard question.
It's supposed to be hard. But don't you worry, we will explain it. Don't you worry.
And I think a lot would like to turn themselves to the Grandmaster. In a reaction.
To be set up for Masonic trial for illegally amending the Masonic Law book. Okay. Again, A. Let's not do anything. Na-publish na eh. Touch move. Okay. B. Sige na nga. Correct natin sa next printing. Di ba? I-insert natin without anybody knowing. Or C. Teka lang. Saan mo ba napulot tong supposed correction na to? Baka naman amendment yan. Di ba? Or mea culpa. We did an amendment of the Masonic Law book. Okay? Patay. We are surrendering ourselves to Most Worshipful June for expulsion. Like, for example, the latest Grandmaster's decision earlier today for immediate expulsion for illegally amending the Masonic Law book. Okay. How are we? Very worshipful Dennis.
Okay, we're like 55-60%.
Let's give 1 more minute.
1 minute.
Let's give 1 more minute.
They're still voting. Yeah.
Let's give 1 minute, so hopefully we can finish early.
While they're voting, very worshipful Teddy, let's just remind everybody that all your questions, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. The chat are for greetings and for some messages. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. All questions in the Q&A will be answered by very worshipful Teddy after his lecture. Okay, so don't worry. He will attend to it one by one. As long as you're still in the webinar, you will hear his reply about your queries. So he will mention your name and what you're mentioning there. I think we can already stop the polling, very worshipful, and
Okay.
share the results. Okay.
Okay. So clearly you shouldn't do nothing. You should not ignore a request for correction. That's the wrong way to go about it. Okay? So if you are a Grand Lodge officer in charge of updating the Masonic law, you have to, in good faith, look at the proposed correction. Okay? Will you turn yourself in? Baka nga. If assuming you illegally changed the Masonic law book, because an update is not an amendment. An update is not an amendment, and we'll find that out later. Okay? Will you simply allow it as an error of publication? And the majority of you answered it that way. Clearly, wait. What is the basis ba? What is the basis ba for this? Well, if you look at the ordinances as to the first one, include orator, almoner, and lecturer. If you look at the ordinances, there is some basis for this. Because ordinances, part 2, article 16, section 1 says, among the officers are orator, almoner, lecturer, and organist. Orator, almoner, lecturer, and organist. So actually, if you go to the ordinances, malito, you should add orator, almoner, lecturer, and organist. Okay? And then, as to this preference or discretion of the senior warden to appoint a junior deacon, you have to contend with Part 2, Article 10, Section 12 of the ordinances, which provide, this is Part 2, this is not Part 3, this is Part 2, which says, such appointive officers shall be appointed by the master-elect and installed at the same time as elective officers, not later than March 31 of the same year. Okay? Brethren, before I go forward, this is the first thing that you should do before you act on this. And this is why it's important that you keep, not just a souvenir, old copies of the Masonic law book, because they are not just collector's editions, but they are your template for determining if there was an amendment in an update. And if you go to Part 3, Article 1 and Article 2, you will see that they have not been changed. So, what is a wrong answer? D. The update committee did not change these portions. So therefore, this is not a illegal amendment, right? And we know it cannot be A because you must see if this is truly a correction you should do or not. Okay? So, should you allow the error in correction? There you have to look at the difference between Part 3 and Part 2. Okay? And for that, I'll close now the poll and go to the next slide. Okay. The key to resolving this question is that you need to know the rationale between each of the five parts of the Masonic law book. Part 3, the uniform bylaws, as I highlighted, represent large governance norms that have been brought to us from time immemorial, which the Grand Lodge made uniform. These lodges, usually they have orator, almoner, and organist. However, there are the lodges don't have enough members to be these officers. So what happens? In these occasions, traditionally, okay, the worshipful master takes on the duties of orator if there's not enough brethren. Traditionally, the senior warden takes on the duties of the lecturer because it is the duty of the senior warden, traditionally, to supervise Masonic work. And the junior warden is in charge, takes on traditionally the duties of a lodge almoner because when it comes to refreshment and the concerns of brethren, that is the traditional duty of a junior warden. Now, there are lodges who do not have music, okay, or during work or ceremonies, in which case no organist was appointed. That is why if you look at our uniform bylaws, these officers are classified as other officers appointed by lodge. What about the junior deacon? Since time immemorial, the junior deacon has traditionally been recognized as the assistant of the senior warden. So, brethren, okay? Therefore, traditionally, whoever is junior deacon, the senior warden has some discretion to appoint that brother because he or she is effectively the senior warden's assistant. Now, here's the thing. How do you reconcile this with the requirement of the Grand Lodge to have an orator, lecturer, almoner, organist? How do you reconcile this? The Grand Lodge is basically saying you should have this. But the Grand Lodge also recognizes if you don't have these officers dahil kulang ang members nyo, okay lang. You have to fulfill the other roles because the other roles, senior deacon, junior deacon, marshal, chaplain, those roles are important. Those roles cannot be given to another lodge officer. Okay. Now, take note how the bylaws are worded. Does the senior warden always speak? Not necessarily. It is his discretion, but he need not to. In which case, you now go to the rule in the ordinances. The master-elect is the one in charge of providing the full list of officers, the master-elect, at his installation. If the incoming senior warden selects a junior deacon, then internally he has to give that pick to the master-elect. But if he doesn't, then the master-elect is required, as a matter of fact, by our ordinances to indicate who be junior deacon. It goes under now the general rule that the master appoints the appointive officers. So that's how you reconcile the provisions. And the key there is asking yourself first, was there a change? If you read every Masonic law book, okay, these have always been the provisions. So therefore, it's not an amendment. So that makes you ask why. You get the why from knowing Masonic history and the governance norms of parts 2 and 3. So that will now tell you that the correct answer is C. Why? Because if you now change, okay, the wording, the phrasing of part 3, you are effectively doing an amendment to part 3, which is not allowed by in an update process. Okay? Ano ba yan? Amendment and update process. Let's go to that, brethren, very briefly. First amendment. There are 3 ways by which the Masonic law book is amended. And sometimes, brethren who don't understand this, confuse this. There are 3 ways, brethren. First, according to part 1, article 9, section 1, by edicts issued by the Grand Master, pursuant to his legislative power in between communications. Take note, there is a requirement, okay, that these edicts must be complementary to the Constitution. Who is the authority on whether it is complementary or not? The brethren. The brethren, when they confirm that edict during the communication. Okay? Is it possible that the Grand Master can end up issuing an edict that, could not be, impossibly not that is not complementary? Yes. He can, for example, say, wag na tayo mag-Masonic work. Mag-civic club na lang tayo like Rotary or Lions, okay? You apply, you do the Macarena, and if the Macarena dance is okay, you are voted by the brethren and you're a member. He can do that edict. But there are 2 ways There are two ways of uh, of uh, of making sure that edict is not recognized. Okay, the brethren will obviously shoot that down at the annual communication because it is in violation of two landmarks, our unwritten law in Part 5. Two landmarks. Landmark 2, all symbolic Freemasonry is divided into 3 degrees, and an essential part of Freemasonry is the legend of the third degree, encapsulated by landmark 3. But then you will say, teka lang. Part 1, Article 9, Section 1 says, edicts are immediately implemented. Why is that the case? You have to note our unique set of governance norms in Masonry, where leadership, okay, is not just an office, but a charge. It is a trust put upon the master of a lodge or a grand master. What if the master of a lodge, or in this case, the grand master violates that? That is where Part 2, Article 18-A comes in. Charges can be brought against the Grand Master for violating, in this case, landmarks 2 and 3. Okay, for issuing an edict abolishing Masonic work. Immediately, charges can be brought. So that's how we make sure that edicts are complementary to our Constitution when they amend it. Okay, they are, even if they change the letter, they are complementary to the spirit and rationale of the Constitution, which also involves our ancient traditions and our conceptual foundation as a philosophical fraternity. Okay. Now, also it can be amended by what we call the standing committee, a permanent committee on revision of the communication of the Constitution, which can do two things: propose specific amendments, okay, or on the direction of a Grand Master or the Grand Lodge at an annual communication, supervise the process for a comprehensive revision, complete numerous amendments of the Constitution. Okay, so that latter one must have the instruction of the Grand Master or the Grand Lodge or the Grand Lodge at an annual communication. It must be confirmed. Specific amendments it can propose. Okay, why would this not be just be placed as an edict? Because sometimes the Grand Master may feel that it should just be decided by the brethren instead of issuing it as an edict. So the way to do that is, if he doesn't want to do it and sponsor it by himself, is to allow the committee to put this on the agenda through its committee report so that it can be discussed on the floor of the convention. Brethren, there is a third way. There is a third way to amend the Constitution. And that is, if it's a Constitution, it's Part 1, Article 25, Section 1. Or if it's our ordinances, Part 2, Article 21, Section A-1. Okay? As proposed by individual brethren or subordinate lodges. If the Grand Master does not issue an edict, for example, or okay, the standing committee has not on its own initiated a specific amendment, brethren or subordinate lodges can on their own submit to the committee for study proposed changes. And even if these changes the committee has a negative recommendation, the brethren can be confident that this will be submitted for consideration of the brethren in plenary. So that it could even be overridden, a negative recommendation. That is if you believe that a specific amendment must be in place. That is your right to propose amendments as an individual brother. And that is our third way of amending. We have to distinguish, brethren, okay, amendments from updating the Masonic Law Book. The Masonic Law Book is the text of all 5 parts. Okay, Constitution, ordinances, bylaws, regulations of the craft within the fraternity, and regulations affecting public and our relations with other grand lodges, our unwritten law, and our templates. All of this together, over time, the text becomes outdated. Okay? And that's normal. This text does not contain the edicts of Most Worshipful June because that is still to be submitted for confirmation by the brethren in ANCOM next year. But if you don't update the text, okay, you're going to have a situation where brethren are trying to find specific edicts. Okay? So how do you update the text? You merely collate and arrange so that it can be referred to easily. There are two ways. Part 1, Article 7, Section 1D. The Standing Committee on Revision can make recommendations as to collating this and recommending dissemination thereof. However, the last one, Penal Law Book in 2012, in the 8 years that have passed, we have a lot of new edicts and wholly new sections. Like, for example, Article 20 of Part 2, the ordinances on individual Masonic education introduced by Most Worshipful Bumble. Okay, we have wholly new sections in. That has to be updated. Do you need an edict like a monitor to update that? No. Because they've already been passed and confirmed by the brethren. What you do need, though, is to arrange them properly for easy reference. So what do you do if you're an update committee? And that, in this case, is what happened. By circular, the Grand Master, pursuant to Part 1, Article 7, Section 3, can create a special committee to do that updating, to do 5 things. Delete laws and regulations that have been superseded already or revised or otherwise become functus officio. What does that mean? There are edicts that, for example, appoint certain brethren to, like, for example, Committee on the Centennial. But it's finished already, right? So it's functus officio. It's already passed. You don't need that edict anymore. You don't need to refer to that edict. That goes into our book of edicts as a historical fact, right? Second, omission of laws and regulations that are still in effect or may have not been inadvertently included, okay? Missing. So now you correct. Or, okay, ensure arrangement, okay, like what we did with Part 4 to best facilitate reference. Check for typographical errors. And we found some. For example, in the Grand Lodge Inspector installation ceremony, obvious typographical errors. We corrected that. And finally, prevent the action of amendments that should go through the regular amendments. What's an example of that one? What are the answer to poll 3? Okay, you went through it, you realized this is going in the Constitution. It's not a typographical error. You must refer that to the Committee on Revision of the Constitution. Okay. Final question. Now we know what the Masonic Law Book is. How do we find the appropriate rule? Okay. The applicable rule you find hopefully through what we call a 3-way test. First, what is the applicable rule? Okay. For example, you want to know specifically what is the rule applicable if if a petitioner has been blackballed or rejected by on his first application. Can he file a motion for reconsideration? What is the applicable rule? You therefore go to the Masonic Law Book to find that out. And at least now you have a general idea. Rejection of petitioner. That relates to a rule provided by the Grand Lodge with regards to how a subordinate lodge operates. So clearly that's Part 2, ordinances. Okay. You also have to check, is the rule correctly cited, right? You go through and you find that there are extensive rules on the handling of petitioners. Let's say the petitioner is accepted. There are extensive rules. But you have to check, is the rule correctly cited? It comes out, there is a new edict by Most Worshipful June as to comprehensively how do we address petitioners and conferral work. So it may not be in the MLB. Okay? That's number 2. Has the applicable rule been revised or supplemented? Sometimes it may be a typographical error. You have to make sure that the rule is cited correctly. When it comes to Masonic work or lodge governance, you can ask your friendly neighborhood district grand lecturer, or if it's not around, your junior grand lecturer. That means, okay, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, okay, of our Masonic Law Book. If you have questions, you can ask them for help. What areas where they have no jurisdiction to advise you on? Okay, part one. The scope and duties of a Masonic lecture do not involve Grand Lodge governance. So for that, if you have a query that you think you cannot decide, that is not clear, what do? You must go to the Committee on Jurisprudence. Okay. So where do you go? What do you do if you end up? When should you go to the Committee on Jurisprudence? Two reasons. One, and not rely on a grand lecture. One, if you feel the interpretation is doubtful, okay, and and you're not persuaded, then you can ask, okay. And if it does not relate to Masonic work or lodge governance, don't even ask your grand lecture. If it relates, for example, to election of grand lodge officers, it's a question you want to raise, you want that question answered, you go to the Committee on Jurisprudence. Most Worshipful June will get them together, get them into one of the conference rooms on the second floor of Plaridel Masonic Temple, lock the door until they find a solution to your query. Okay, but seriously, that's their job. Okay, you can also look at if it's another rule that relates to Masonic work or lodge governance. When when was that rule adopted? You can look at the report in the communication proceedings adopting that rule. And then, of course, you have Masonic traditions, our unwritten laws, and overarching all of this, the spirit, brethren, and the general public, the spirit of our Masonic Constitution, which is where I want to end. Very often, and this is really tragic, even in our fraternity, we tend to be very legalistic with the letter of the law, not realizing that most important in all of this is the spirit of our Masonic law, which is encapsulated in the preamble of our Masonic Constitution. All of these constitutional provisions are ancient laws. We must implement them. Okay, pursuant to how that we exercise the 10 teachings of Freemasonry, promote love, foster brotherly harmony among Masons and men, enhance the welfare of our order. And if you listen to my lecture during Independence Day, you will see why this is here. Because this is from our roots as a continental Masonic lodge, from our roots in continental Freemasonry. Preserve liberty, equality, and fraternity. So, brethren, I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and maybe we can go to your question and your questions. Very worshipful Dennis,
Yeah.
can we move?
Wait, Eddie, maybe you can access the Q&A from your side and then answer them one by one.
Okay. For lack of time, brethren, I am not going to go through specific questions with relate to the Masonic Law Book. I apologize for that because we're a bit pressed for time here. But let me highlight that if you look at the topics, maybe it's there. If it relates to Masonic work or lodge governance, you can always contact me after. Okay. So going further, okay, let me just select here the questions that are relevant to the topic today. Are opinions of the Committee on Jurisprudence that have been approved by the GM and ratified by the Grand Lodge part of our laws and jurisprudence? Yes. Okay. If so, those opinions of the Committee on Jurisprudence are interpretations of the law. And if they are confirmed by the brethren in plenary, they are definitive interpretations. That's why it's important that you check them. And the one that has that, they're not all published, the one that has that is the Committee on Jurisprudence. Okay? Going forward. Okay. If a member with no dual lodge, okay. We will talk about that in a future webinar. What if a brother was initiated past in one particular lodge and raised courtesy in another? Who will be his mother lodge? His mother lodge, okay. Because it was courtesy, his mother lodge is the sponsoring lodge. Okay, because the degrees were only given to him in courtesy in the lodge where he was visiting. Okay? If my mother lodge is here in the USA as a regular member and I want to be a member of the field, will I be? No. Okay? When you talk about plural members, you talk about membership within each jurisdiction. Okay? If you're talking about does plural membership count for your foreign lodges, it doesn't. We're talking about your lodge memberships within a jurisdiction. Meron ba index sa new MLB natin to make it easier to search for answer-related rules? Unfortunately, we were pressed for time, but I'm sure that future editions, likely there will be an index to make it easier to reference. External stakeholders, the public, our families, okay? The government, okay? Those are examples of external stakeholders. The churches that we are members of, those are examples of external stakeholders. Are approved edicts inserted in particular articles or sections? Yes. As much as possible, if they supersede a specific provision, we will change. We will change the. That means that the text has to be changed. If you attend a lodge stated meeting in one of the Philippine lodges, can you wear the apron of your U.S. lodge? It depends. It depends. If you are a visitor, even though you're a Filipino but you're a member, but your lodge is the foreign lodge, you must wear the apron of that foreign lodge. If you are also a member of that lodge, you must wear the apron of the Philippine lodge because you are a regular member. So you cannot wear your foreign apron. I hope that's clear. Because of dwindling finances and memberships, if my lodge is dissolved and then I join another, will my lodge retain its standing officers and members? Well, the lodge has been dissolved. So for that is, it's died. Masonic IDs, I'll refer your question to, you can talk about that directly with Very Wishful Dennis. On relations with external stakeholders, is the Grand Lodge of the Philippines politically partisans or non-partisan? Officially, we are regular Freemasons. Now we cannot talk about politics. It is part of our Masonic traditions that even though we have continental roots, now we cannot take positions in public matters unless we are pushed by the common good to do so. That is why you have, for example, that specific position that we have against communism. Okay, so that has to be approved on the plenary by the brethren. Don't you think that Section 3, Article 5 is in contradiction with Section 1, Article 5, which mandates that the Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, and so forth shall be elected by secret ballot? How can the look? I don't think this is the place to answer this, but I can happily discuss with you, Kuya Eli, offline. Okay. Does the Grand Lodge of the Philippines officially adopt Albert Mackay's landmarks? What we have officially, let me highlight. The landmarks that you see in Part 5, there are different sets. There are different official sets of landmarks. Okay? Different regular jurisdictions have different sets. Okay? If you look at the US, they have different landmarks adopted. It can range from, I think, 14 to all 25. We have adopted the Mackay version. You can do that. You can compare that with what is actually written with what we have. Okay, so yes, we have. What is the proper procedure to become a dual or affiliate member within the GLP whose mother lodge belongs to a foreign jurisdiction? Well, you have to get a regular, you have to get a, either a demit or certificate of good standing, and you follow the regular process. Take note. If you are already a past master, okay, in a foreign jurisdiction, you're entitled to the title worshipful here. Why? Because the definition of master includes brethren who have served as master in a foreign regular lodge. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Can we use this Zoom during our IMES? Yes, there's going to be online version of the IMES diploma program that is required under Article 20 of our ordinances, except for ritual, which must be done because of Masonic secrets that has to be done live. Okay? Brother Dave, yung about soliciting funds, you can I'll talk to you about that on offline. Okay, you can take up with that with me offline. Also, with regards to petitioners, we have another webinar. That's going to be the next webinar. Can a lodge amend its bylaws during conferral first, then the business? Well, brethren, obviously you have to follow the bylaws. Okay, so you have to follow the agenda there. But of course, your bylaws, if you amend it, they can. You can follow that. You can follow that amendment. Okay. You look at the with regards to edicts that are no longer in the Masonic law book. To find out what happened to them, Brother Joseph Ang, you can look at our book of edicts. Okay. In case the GM issues an edict that many brethren think go against the landmark, what will be the proper course? Like I said, two courses. They can reject that. We had in the 1990s, I won't mention it anymore, he just passed away. We had a Grand Master who issued a lot of edicts, and most of them, with the exception of, I think, one or two, were rejected. Okay? So you can hold them accountable at the annual communication. Or if they violate the landmarks, then you can do the process of holding him accountable through a Masonic trial and Masonic charges that is in our ordinances. For the benefit of all and to stay away from different interpretation, how should the MLB be interpreted? Okay? By the plain meaning or statutory construction. Brethren, okay? If it is not vague, you obviously follow what the Masonic law book provides. Okay? But you do the three-way test to make sure that it is the correct law because it may not be updated. You also have to check if it involves Masonic work or lodge governance. It is helpful to check with a grand lecturer because that is our job, to advise you. If it, however, involves a question of, for example, the Constitution, you have to go, and there is serious disagreement, okay? You must go directly to the Committee on Jurisprudence because that is beyond our jurisdiction as grand lecturers. Instead of printing the new MLB every ANCOM, would it be possible to have an electronic copy? We're studying that, okay? Is MLB now available at the bookstore? Yes, you get when the online portal is back, I think you can buy it for 450 pesos. Thank you very much, brethren. Okay. Is a petitioner in another lodge who has lapsed, can he apply another lodge? Yes, provided he has a demit and he has, I think he has 6 months. I'm not sure, but our ordinances provide for you to, like for example, a UD. Okay, lodge UD. From what I recall, I may be wrong, but from what I recall, let's say it's not granted charter, you can. Okay, you have 6 months to look for another lodge and go there. Okay, can a brother from another jurisdiction petition for? Of course, you can petition, and you don't call it plural membership. Okay, you can petition to be a member here. Okay, as long as it's a regular, as long as it is a regular lodge and you meet the definition of residency. That is why it is important. Okay, that's why it's important that you know the definitions. That's the first place you should look at. The definitions provided at the very end of part 2 are ordinances. Can we do income generating projects? Yes, you can, but supervised by your DDGM. Look up the DDGM's powers. Most worshipful Voltaire, I understand, has an edict on that. We've put that in the Masonic law book. It's there now. Is there any article of the NLB that mentioned about how we deal with members of an independent Grand Lodge? We don't recognize any other Grand Lodge in this Masonic jurisdiction. Only regular Grand Lodge in this jurisdiction. So we cannot converse with them Masonically. What happens to GM edicts that were read in ANCOM but was not indicated as approved nor disapproved in Circular to ANCOM? If it's not in the circular, that is a typographical error. If it is approved by the brethren and there was an error, okay, in not indicating them in the circular, for purposes of record, what is binding is the transaction that the one issued by the our most worshipful Danny, our Grand Lodge Secretary, to prove that indeed it was approved by the brethren during an annual communication. Okay, that goes through all the questions. Brethren, going forward, let me just highlight, okay, okay, let me just highlight, brethren, we've distributed, going forward, every month, we hope to meet you every third Wednesdays in the West for our webinar series. We hope you find this interesting, and we will be circulating the handout of this for further reference. We have 2 rounds, and what is the basis for these 5? Those are the regular topics in our IMES course. This is supposed to supplement that. And we hope going into the ANCOM next year, you can make use of this. And if there are further questions, please always look to your friendly neighborhood district grand lecturer. If he's not available, the junior grand lecturer or me, to help you out with these matters. Thank you very much for attending, brethren.
Thank you
Kuya
very much.
Dennis, very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, very worshipful Teddy Calao, our senior grand lecturer, for that very informative and well-delivered lecture about our Constitution, our Masonic Law Book. I hope it enlightened a lot of brethren who participated in this webinar. There were a lot of messages, Kuya Teddy, that were posted in the chat, and we thank you all for your participation, brethren and guests. Truly, you joining this webinar made it even more meaningful and successful for us. We would like to thank also the Cable Tow team headed by its editor-in-chief, Kuya Harold Santiago, and Kuya Albert Dumlao, who's the managing editor and who's working on the broadcast, and the whole team of Cable Tow who are doing the Facebook webinar. As last day showed me, Kuya Teddy, we were able to reach about 5,000 people in Facebook. In this webinar registration, there were 1,089 who registered.
Most very worshipful Dennis, may we highlight, they can buy the Masonic Law Book at our store and in our online. It's 450 pesos. And to make sure it's updated, they can go in our website for the latest edicts and circulars, which will be presented to them for their consideration at the next ANCO. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very worshipful Dennis.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
Okay, so for the next webinar, we will be sending out the invitation next week, just so it will not be forgotten in your inbox, and so you will get an updated invitation. But before we officially end, very worshipful Oliver, do you have anything to say to the participants here now?
Nothing much, very worshipful Dennis, but kung meron pang mga ibang katanungan na hindi nasagot, perhaps we can take note of that and answer them separately. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, very worshipful AGS, and thank you very much, very worshipful SGL. And to all those who have joined in here, thank you very much. The Grand Lodge right now, under pandemic and under these circumstances, is working on things that will make our relations and our communications easy. That is why the Grand Lodge will be issuing personalized email addresses to all lodges in the jurisdiction that is dedicated to your lodge, and with the portal under grandlodge.ph. So lahat ngayon, kuwari, yung lodge namin, Jose Abad Santos Masonic Lodge number 333 at grandlodge.ph. So all lodges will have that portal now, email address. So it will be easier to communicate among lodges. I-type lang yung pangalan and then they can easily send messages. And officially also we can send communication from the Grand Lodge to the lodges smoothly. So with that, again, thank you, very worshipful Teddy and very worshipful Oliver, and to our most worshipful Grandmaster for really inspiring everyone to work on this series. And we're hoping to see you in our next webinar series. To everyone, again, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat at maraming salamat sa pakikisama nyo ngayong gabi. Thank you.